these two mics here right close together? It's fine. It's not whistling or doing anything weird. Feel free to drink a lot. As you've noticed, I drink a lot of water. In order to be able to be at Camp Minnesota, I take a lot of allergy pills, and one side effect is they make my mouth very dry. Well, it's been a good day so far. Thank you, Cousins 4. At one point I was thinking, Cousins 4 and Sisters 5 ought to do a song together, and then maybe we could be called Sister Cousins 9 or something. But we didn't manage to get that together. The sister that's going to help with some input tonight is Sister Wendy, in case you haven't memorized our names yet. Tonight's session, serving, a challenge, and a blessing. Can a difficult experience turn into a joy and even a humorous experience? Let's start off again by saying the verse that we tried this morning, Philippians 2, 4, and 5. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Your attitude should be the same of that of Jesus Christ. All right. How will God use you as a light today? There's a light down there. Can you shine brightly like the lighthouse? How will God use your hands today? Tonight. We are going to talk about some challenging things maybe tonight, but I also want it to end up to be a feel-good session before you go to bed. So I'm going to start out with a children's book. This children's book is called Ordinary Mary's Extraordinary Deed. And let's just see what happens. I'll let you see what she looks like, but I probably won't show you every picture. Ordinary Mary was so very ordinary that you'd never guess she could change the world. This ordinary kid, she did. She changed the world. One ordinary day, skipping on her way from the ordinary school in her ordinary house, she passed an ordinary vacant lot filled with ordinary bushes, growing ordinary berries, ordinary blue and juicy, luscious, lovely berries. Well, Ordinary Mary picked the ordinary berries and brought them in a big brown bowl to Mrs. Bishop's porch. What? Left berries in a big brown bowl on Mrs. Bishop's porch? That sneaky kid. She did. This made Mrs. Bishop very, very happy. So she baked a big batch of blueberry muffins and thought of 5 people who might have brought those beautiful berries, then secretly gave each a plate. How great 5 people got a plate. One of those 5 was her paper boy, Billy Parker, and when Billy saw his name on a note in the driveway on a plate, he quickly parked his bike and ate every crumb. Oh, yum, 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 yum. He ate every crumb. This made him so glad that the next 5 people got their papers on the porch and not in the bushes where he often threw them. In fact, they were handed right to them. Well, one of those 5 was Mr. Stevens, who was so amazed that he smiled for 10 hours on the airplane, then said to 5 different people who had heavy bags, "Here, let me help you." He still smiled, and they did too. One of those 5 was Maria, whose cranky little boy James stopped crying when Mr. Stevens played peekaboo with him, and their ride came. When he waved goodbye, Maria exclaimed, "How strange that a stranger would be so sweet." And the next day when she was out shopping, once, twice, 5 times, she did something nice for 5 different people. 5 times without stopping. Well, you've got the idea now. It spread and it spread from 1 person to 5 to 25, and it kept going and going and going until finally, one of those 5 was Kate, a woman on vacation who wanted to see a show she'd heard was a sensation. "Oh no," she said, "it's sold out, but I'm going home tomorrow," and her face filled with sorrow. Mr. Taylor held out his ticket. "I live here," he said. "I can go anytime. Take mine." Kate loved the show and was so touched that she thought buying 5 presents for 5 people back home would be really fun. And one of those 5 presents was a little heart necklace for Mary, her niece. And you should have seen her surprise. Her eyes lit up in surprise. Mary? What? Ordinary Mary? Yes, ordinary Mary's extraordinary deed had come full circle. And on its way, it had changed the life of every person living. You see, when Mrs. Bishop made muffins from Mary's blueberries, not only the paper boy, Billy Parker, but the other 4 people, too, made 5 people smile. And so did those 5, and so did those 5. Just see where it all went. Until finally, there were 6,103,515,625 who benefited. Well, 6 million is even more than all the people on the planet, so after everyone had a share and everybody knew that somebody cared, there was even love left over. The world was changed, and thousands and millions and billions agreed it was all because one ordinary day, ordinary Mary did a perfectly ordinary, stunningly, earth-shaking, totally extraordinary deed. This little book reinforces the idea that a little person like me or like you can make a big difference. We don't have to do something big, but it's often the small things that make a difference. This was a book with a lovely message. One child held the power to change the whole world. The story describes the happiness and good deeds that spread across the planet in a chain reaction of goodness. Matthew 22:37-39. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. This is the most important commandment. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Each of us will come across situations and people that call for love, and they will respond to our neighbor. What does it mean to follow God? While my husband and I spent 5 weeks in the hospital this summer, we watched a huge family of geese playing follow the leader. If the leader went one way, they all went one way. If they went to the pond, they all went to the pond. You've heard the phrase, if they would have jumped off the mountain, everybody would have jumped off the mountain. But these geese did follow the leader. Think about this. You know you have a serving heart when you hear of a family friend experiencing an unexpected death, and even though you don't know what you can do, you start taking a cake. And baking and taking a cake. You try to ignore someone having trouble carrying the groceries and think, I don't have time to help them, and you pass them by. But when you unlock your car, you go back and help them. It's when you normally get the mail for your elderly neighbor and you just don't feel like doing it today, but you do anyway, and when you drop it off, she says she's been praying for you. You see on your caller ID that it's a chatty Kathy friend, and you don't really have time to visit, and sometimes she is a little bit annoying, but you decide to take it anyway. It's the Christian thing to do. She is in need to talk to someone, and you're blessed that you took the time. Robin Roberts quoted in her book again, whenever I decide something with an open heart, I usually make the right decision. Every day, you should reach out and physically touch someone. People love a warm hug or just a friendly pat on the back. At our last session, I shared with you that after we returned from Africa and after spending a year and a half in the gospel community, we accepted a 3-year term as camp directors at Swanley Christian Camp. Those 3 years turned into 13 years. One evening during senior high camp, the clouds turned black. The weather radio went off, and we rang the camp bell to get everyone up to the dining hall to the storm shelter. Some of us saw the tornado after everyone else was in the basement, and saw it going by our neighbor's place. The next morning, we did hear that our neighbor's place was completely wiped out. Since it was senior high kids, we decided to go ahead and load up 2 hay racks and take them over to see if we could help. And, like we said before, James 1:25 says, does move us to be doers of the word and not just hearers. So we were trying to be doers that day. Urges us to be consistent in listening and acting in accordance with God's word. Well, when we got to our neighbors and asked where to start, the lady of the house was just overwhelmed. But she said, some of you just stay in the house and go through the rubble. Most everything was gone. She said her wedding ring was gone. She had it on her dresser, and the dresser was gone. The bedroom was gone as well. Well, we sent a couple of high school boys, including one that was nicknamed Rambo, to rummage through the basement. And after some time, sure enough, he found the wedding ring. She was ecstatic. She was a tiny little gal about my size, an older woman, and she just jumped and gave this big football player a hug. He just melted. Later that evening, we had campfire, and high school kids were sharing their stories about service of the day, helping through the tornado. And clear at the end, he cleared his throat, and he said, "Here I am, this tough guy, and when I found the ring and gave it to the lady, she hugged me, and I just melted. I let my guard down." When we give to people, God blesses us right back. When we give, it's given back to us, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. As our camper Rambo discovered, the longer I serve him, the sweeter it grows. That day for him was like a day in heaven. Well, how many of you have watched the old show MASH and know Radar O'Reilly? A few of you, the little guy who ran the telephone, ran the camp basically. In reading a note that he was writing to his mother from the war, he says, "I am writing slowly, Mom, since you can't read fast." So, it may be a simple thing, but Radar, while putting himself in his mother's shoes, was serving through writing. He was doing it in the way he felt best. How do you put yourself in someone else's shoes and serve them in the way that is best for them? I have a friend, Carol, who did this. She has a neighbor who was starting her own business as a beautician, specializing in hair color. Carol wanted to help her out in some way. After visiting with her neighbor and finding out that she charged $60 in the shop, She still wanted to help her, but didn't want to spend quite that much. After visiting with her, they made a deal of a half-price hair color for Carol, and she goes to her house. It saves Carol time and money from driving in, and it gives her friend extra off our business. She was being creative in serving her neighbor. My sister Wendy gave me a quote from her pastor, Anita Kerr of First Mennonite Church in Newton, on John 21. We must act on God's love. Jesus needs what we bring with us. What we do in our daily lives matters. Do you love? Then follow the one who calls. Okay, so I've been mentioning that my husband was in the hospital, and I kept you guessing. What he had was a strange illness called Guillain-Barré. And I know some of you in the audience are familiar with it. Jane Croker has had it 30 years, some years ago, and was kind enough to visit us several times. Wherever you are, Jane, wave to us. So she knew what we were going through and visited and has called a number of times since. And also Tammy Wintermote's husband has had it. It's what it is it's a disease that attacks itself. It started out that he had severe pain, and then he had Bell's palsy. The immune system broke down. His nerves quit talking to each other, and the muscles got weaker and weaker until after 4 days after he had the Bell's palsy effect, I was helping him around the house. He could no longer walk, and we got him to the doctor in a wheelchair. By the time we got to the hospital, they were worried it was making its way up, that he would have respiratory problems, but we got there in time, and they were able to stabilize him. Well, we ended up being in ICU one day, in full care 5 days, and then we went to rehab for 4 weeks. Nurses are people who serve every day, 24 hours a day. They did everything for him. They've gone into the profession, whether they know it or not. They are servants every day. One day after the other, they serve, and we are on the receiving end this time. One nurse in the rehab unit, where we spent 4 weeks, entered the room for her afternoon shift with her thick, dark, curly hair and kind of husky personality. If you've ever seen The Big Fat Greek Wedding, anyone see that? You know Tula, the front girl? Well, she kind of looked and acted like her. As I tried to squelch my giggles thinking about that the first evening she was on duty, she professionally cared for my husband. But I also soon envisioned her as a hovercraft, because she really hovered over us and wanted to do everything that she could. You might say she left no stone unturned, and she was so thorough and also had a servant attitude. She also had the gift of keeping things lighthearted, and with her unique personality, she just had a lighthearted spirit. As my husband was on another unit of IV, she was here and there every 15 minutes checking his temp, heart, blood pressure. She even said, "Oh, don't mind me, I'm just hovering." Well, we liked it. We knew we were in good care. From the moment we moved into the rehab unit, Elton had trouble with his call light on his bed. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Well, this was kind of a problem, because he couldn't move even his toes or his ankles, his feet. He couldn't lift them at all. He couldn't go to the bathroom without help. And so one night we had a visitor, and I was out the room for a while, and nobody came, so our visitor finally ran to the desk and got a nurse. Well, Terry was on duty again, and when the evening was over, she took matters into her own hands. She found a new bed, she wheeled it into the room, took the old bed out. She says, "I'm not waiting for maintenance." She crawled under the bed, she disconnected everything, she got her hair caught, had to call another nurse in to crawl under the bed to get her hair out from under the bed, and pinched her finger, bumped her head, but won the battle. And he had a call light that worked by the end of the evening. Nothing could beat her. Another time, my husband Elton had some leg cramps after his rehab. She went the second mile in serving. She hovered over him, rubbing his legs, and even went to the dining hall and made a special concoction of a strawberry milkshake. Then, one day, as I was just arriving at the hospital, one of the nurses grabbed me and said, "Don't go into Elton's room. We think he's having a heart attack." Well, just what we needed. So they had the techs in there, but our Terry Prompt girl was on duty again, and she was in high gear, doing everything she knew, and serving as the contact between the technicians, the doctors, and other nurses. After about an hour, when everything seemed to be okay, and it was determined that he just had severe muscle spasms, she sighed and said, "Whew, now wasn't that just a little excitement?" I told her I knew that he was in good care because my hover nurse was right with him. Terry knew when to take things seriously, and she knew when it was time to be more lighthearted. Laughter lightens your load and lifts your heart into heavenly places. Learn to laugh at yourself more freely. God delights in your laughter. You can relax and enjoy the present moment. Using humor appropriately in situations may be one way you can serve. Even though it was a heavy time the day Elton had chest pains, we could experience happiness through discouragement, because just as we know that Jesus has his eye on a tiny sparrow, we know he surely watches me.
I sing because I'm happy. I sing because
to use us in the hospital setting when we were there. We knew that we had gotten pretty self-absorbed the first days, but we also wanted to turn our attention to others in the hospital. Even as we were being served, how could we serve? My husband has a contagious laugh, and when we were going to be dismissed, the nurses and therapists said that they would miss that. Our hovering nurse was a single mother of 2, and when she found out that Elton worked at Prep Lumber, she went right to work asking him about several jobs she was doing in her house. He gave her some good free advice and even drew her sketches as best as he could, as flimsy as his hand was. My husband's rehab wasn't all roses. He got discouraged when he had down days with therapy. The nurses told him it's okay to be angry and disappointed. They served him by telling him that he was allowed to have bad days, and he should have bad days. So, do not be afraid to ask for God's face to shine in your present situation, even if dark clouds appear and hover near. By doing this, we were blessed as many times. God's face was shining through our nurses, but I believe also through us. Don't ever think that when you visit someone in the hospital, it's just a little something you can do. Believe me, it's huge. Our 3 children, spouses, and grandchildren spent evening after evening at the hospital. I worried that they were being there too much and getting burned out. But they always smiled, brought food, anniversary gifts, and meals. And our daughter-in-law, who's here today, and our granddaughter stopped in at noon to visit with us and spend lunch with us sometimes. One day, the OT, occupational therapist, had told us that it would be really good if the grandchildren would play games with my husband, because then he could work on his finger movements with little pieces of games and puzzles and coloring. Well, my daughter told her son Sam, who is 6, about this. Well, he was on a project. Every time he came, he says, "Grandpa, this is what we're going to do." And it wasn't too long that our granddaughter Corinne, who's 4 1/2, followed in his footsteps. So they came in and we're ready with crayons and color books and Sorry and other games like that. It was great. We had good quality time in the hospital. We found that if we follow God's light, we will be brought safely through the stormy waters. Service is happening all around us, in our workplaces, schools, hospitals, and homes. May we continue to bear fruit so that the world may see Jesus' invitation to becoming citizens of heaven. Proverbs 16:9 says, "In her heart a woman plans her course, but the Lord determines her steps." If you wonder how to follow Jesus, what steps to take, and how to carry them out, try putting an "ing" onto a lot of verbs. Just try it. Helping, singing, serving, following, empowering, even resting, discipling. Most verbs will work in helping you figure out how to serve. What everyday stories shape and influence our identity as followers of Christ today? What kind of stories do we have?
One of the ways that we sisters and our mom and our daughters mark major birthdays is by dressing up and surprising each other at our places of work. I guess we've never outgrown our love for dress up. Many of you know this. You've seen us dressed up in various occasions. Well, when I turned 40, which was sadly too many years ago, not 50 yet, but almost there. In fact, now I already have to start worrying what they're going to do next year. Well, when I turned 40, I was working at the dialysis center in Hutchinson in the hospital that day, when a group of rather flamboyantly dressed family members arrived to sing to me and take me out to lunch. They made me wear a bright blue tall wig. And when I returned, one of our doctors who was there that day from Wichita said, "Wow, that was so neat. Your family must really love you to do that." I have to admit, I had never thought of those pranks as love. Well, it's easy to love and serve those we know, but what about when opportunities present themselves to us with strangers? I have a lot of contact with strangers because in my current job, I fly often. I'm usually on a plane every 2 to 3 weeks. And so these opportunities present themselves to me pretty often in terms of whether I'm going to just kind of sleep and tune out for that plane ride, or whether I'm going to interact with people sitting next to me. I have listened to many experiences of joy and pain, from someone trying to quit smoking, someone going to a funeral of a loved one, or a joyful wedding, even an Olympic speed skater who was struggling with marital issues. One day, I had my Mennonite World Review along. Some of you know I have a little close connection with that specific newspaper. And I'd been reading it on the way, and at the end of the flight, a woman came up from behind, and she said, you know, when I got on the plane, I passed by and I saw you were reading the Mennonite. It was Mennonite Weekly Review back then. She said, you know, I grew up Mennonite, but I left the Mennonite church a long time ago. Could I have that newspaper? I said, well, sure. So who knows? At least maybe it got her in touch with Mennonites again. So in those situations, how much of ourselves and our faith are we willing to share? Are we willing to say, I'll pray for you, even if we have no idea whether that stranger is a Christian or not, or how they'll react? How much are we willing to put ourselves out there for others? As a friend recently told me, without any adventures, we have no stories to tell. About 5 years ago, we had one of our Sunday school members who died due to cancer. Neil Deno was one of those guys who was loud and boisterous, sometimes got himself in a little bit of trouble, right, Amy? But he never held back. And so he's been an inspiration to me when I get into conversations and I think, should I say something or shouldn't I? I think of Neil and I say, you know, Neil wouldn't have held back. He would have been sitting here just talking with anybody who would listen. And the fun thing about not holding back is being surprised about what you might receive in return. One day I got on the plane and I was seated to a 9-year-old girl. She promptly said to me, I'm an unaccompanied minor. I said, okay. She told me she flew quite regularly because her parents are divorced and they live in different states, and so she flies across the country. We started talking about our family and her sisters, and I got out pictures of my 2 girls, and I showed her my daughters, and I told her that my oldest daughter, Abby, at that time was doing a year of mission work. Her eyes got wide, and she said, do you go to a church that teaches you about missions? I go to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and missions are important to us too. Then I realized she was from the Mormon church, and you know, quite often they do the 2-year mission. So I said, I go to a Mennonite church, and missions are important to us too. She looked at me and she said, you know, sometimes we don't want to do mission, but we need to because the Lord wants us to. As I was marveling at the insight of this young girl, she pulled out a big pink fluffy blanket and said, time for my nap. How simple it is when we look at service this way. It may be difficult at times, or we may not want to do service, but we just need to remember, Jesus wants us to. Last spring, I was noticing our neighborhood children playing outside, and I realized that I don't know any of them. Shortly after that, again on a plane, I was reading an article in a magazine about little free libraries that you can start in your yard. Basically, these little free libraries are little houses on posts, and when you open the door, there are books inside. And neighborhood children or adults can come to your little free library in your yard and take a book, read it, bring it back, and also put some of their own books in if they wish. I just could not forget about this little free library idea. I would think about it in church, and I just kept thinking about it and thinking about it. And this would just be neat to do. I kept weighing all the pros and cons. Finally, it just came to the old Neil, thinking about Neil again. You know, no holding back. When my husband Paul also thought it could be something good to do, that's all the reassurance I needed. We now have our little free library, and we will be mounting it soon in our yard as soon as it rains so that we can dig the hole in the very hard ground. So I'm looking forward to how this act of service will play out in our neighborhood, both in terms of being of service to the children, but also in receiving myself growing friendships with our neighbors. Acts of service big or small, with those we know or with strangers, planned or spontaneous, all include showing God's love to others. I hope you are pondering how you can be of service to others. And if you are reluctant, just remember, no holding back.
Yes, Wendy has all kinds of traveling experiences. She can keep you entertained for hours. And some difficult situations turn into joys. They can even become humorous. Even the smallest effort, like her little community library, can be a spot of joy for someone. Even in the most unexpected places, even if I feel like giving up or not getting involved, if I trust Jesus, he will use me to do his work. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. Mark 10:43. Jesus states clearly that his kingdom is an upside-down one in which those who would be great should endeavor to be servants. This fits with the rest of Jesus' life and teaching. To gain life, I need to lose mine. How many of you lived during the hippie generation? I mentioned it a little bit earlier that I was one of those. Well, one thing I have to say about that generation, it might have had its extremes in clothing and acts, but one thing it did was to let go of material things, reach out to others, and live a common life. Now, isn't that what Jesus did? Your life holds for you endless possibilities because anything is possible. Remember that true happiness will be found in relationships. Relationships that you have formed because you have served someone in some way. We create bonds during times when we are serving others, when our beliefs and our experiences shape who we are. These bonds cannot be broken. Even when life gets busy or when we lose temporary touch with someone, we still need to let friends know that we think of them often and they will always be in a special place in our hearts. Friendship is one of life's greatest treasures, and it lasts a lifetime. Don't ever doubt that you can move mountains or make even a little difference in someone's life. Faith without action is dead. My husband had two friends that came, well, actually three, that came fairly regularly. One came during Sunday morning when a lot of other people wouldn't visit because they were in church. And that was Marlene Bogart's husband who did the session today. Another one was his roommate in college, Fred Wardle. And the first time he was there, he brought ice cream. And as he left, he said, "You may soon be able to dance like a leprechaun on top of a head of a needle." I don't know if I was stressed out or what, but I just burst out laughing and I couldn't control myself. My eyes were watering. And all I could do was see this image of my husband dancing on top of a needle, and he could barely move his legs. And I have to think maybe he paraphrased it after, "It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God." But anyway, it was a good paraphrase. I'd like for you now to turn to "I Will Serve You Because I Love You." I think, is it on page 3 or 7? I don't remember. And as you sing it, remember what you can do. And I knew that someday Elton would be able to dance like a leprechaun on top of a head of a needle, even though it was humorous visual for us. Fred also brought Elton ice cream every time he came, and every time he left, he gave us that image. He knew how to lighten our load, and that's what friends do.
You have given life.
You have heard so many ways we can serve. Help us to do just a little act of kindness. You know each of us and what we are capable of. We have examples of wonderful women around us, those who've been here before us. We have examples of women in the Bible that have served and have made us laugh when they served. Help us to trust in your love, to know that you walk with us wherever we go. Those who respond faithfully to you are the ones who choose to follow. Give us that courage. Give us that hope. Give us joy. Amen.
Just a reminder of some of our schedule for this evening, starting at 8.